Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you a few different ways you can combine shapes. Going to be repeating a few things that we did last week. And again, if you feel like it's too simple, feel free to make it more complicated, like push yourself a little bit more, or you can also skip ahead. Okay, so we're going to create a new file. And again, we're looking at letter size, orientation, horizontal. And again, here, I want to point this out here. I'm going to show you how you can make this how you can change it very easily, fluidly. And the main reason that I work with picas is because it translates really nicely to points, and you don't get these crazy fractions, right? Picas has a different way of notation, so it's picas on one side of the P and points on the other. It's a nice system to get used to. Up to you, you don't have to work with picas if you don't want to. Totally up to you. Go ahead and create this new file. So again, if your interface does not look like this, just go up here to the switch artboards and you can switch to a different, go back to GD157. If anything's missing and your GD157 needs to be updated, make sure you can just, you can find your palettes here. One thing that may happen sometimes is your palettes may disappear. And that's, if you notice down here, I clicked on the tab key. So tab will hide and show the palettes. So if your palettes are missing, you just have to hit the tab key and they'll come back. One thing you can do is if they are, you can actually hide them intentionally if you have a small workspace, and if you scroll over here, they will reappear. So it's a way to make better use of your space. I'm just going to leave them on, so that activates this auto hide. Okay, so let's get started. What I want to do is I want to show you, again, a few different ways of combining shapes, and I'm going to show you a couple more things at the same time, but we're mostly going to focus on combining shapes. I want you to start off again by downloading an image from Unsplash. So Unsplash is a great space for finding royalty-free images. So you may have run into that when you were doing your research on attribution last week, but basically they're images that you're allowed to use for free. So let's go to Unsplash. Unsplash, so beautiful free images. Here you can see that images are going to show up right away. Do have an image that I chose. Just one moment. So I'm actually going to go to a specific location and I'm going to show you how I saved this. It doesn't really matter what image you choose for this exercise, but here you can see that I have this image that is called, that has no name. So I'm going to show you how I saved the attribution. So it's way easier to do this if you're collecting a lot of images and you don't take the time to save this information when you're working, it's going to be really hard to go back and get it afterwards. So if you click here on download free image, it'll download it into your downloads folder if you're on a Mac. I have no idea where it saves it on Windows. I can help you if you're really stuck. But anyways, you can see that it's giving me some of the information that I need right here. One piece of information that it doesn't give me is the date. So here we have published this year, so all you need is the year. If I go to my downloads folder, you can see that it downloaded this at the top, and it gave me, in the file name, it saved the name of the author, and it gave me this string here, which is VRSINDPJPCS, and it's a hash. But this hash is actually useful because on Unsplash, you can see that this is actually how you find the image. So it's part of the URL. To make things easier, I nearly always save the URL if it's not too long. So I'm just going to copy that, so Command C, and I'm going to go here to this file name, and I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to change this here, just as easier for me to remember if I put the URL right in there. If you copy the http:// Apple won't let you save it into here because Apple does not allow you to save a colon in a file name, and so it'll give you an error. So if it's like that, it's going to tell me that I can't do that. It's the name that I can't use. So all you have to do is just use the string without the HTTP, and I can enter that. Just like don't paste, and it'll put the HTTP in for me. I don't need to save that. So the only other things that I need out of here, the only other thing that I need is a date. But I'm going to take the time to format this properly. So I'm just going to put in 2022 in here, and I'm actually going to put it in brackets. Again, I don't know what Windows will allow you to do. I'm going to delete this hyphen, and I am going to capitalize it properly. So right click, transformation, capitalize. And here I have all the information that I need to attribute this in the simple way that we do it in this class. Again, if you go to another course at UFE, they may require more accurate formatting, like with periods in the right places. A lot of, you only save the last name and the initial of the first name has to be in the right order. So be really careful when you go to another class that if you're required to use APA formatting for your references, that you do it correctly and don't come back and say, well, Andrew said I can do it this way. They're not going to care. Okay, I'm going to go here into my folder, and I'm going to move it into there. So Apple lets me use tabs here, which makes it a little bit easier. But I'm going to go into here into my exercise folder for this week, which I'm calling 3 compound shapes. And I'm going to create a new folder in here, new folder called images. And again, this is really important when you're working in, especially when you're working in GD 159, digital design. I forget the name of it. Anyways, in a course where you learn how to work with, when you're working with image in design, it's very important that you keep things well organized, because you're going to be working with a lot of images, and it's going to get really messy if you don't set up a good structure for your files before you start working. So InDesign has a hard time finding images. If you put the images into an images folder, and you always use an images folder, then you'll be organized before you start, and it's going to work great. So before you start, download any image from Unsplash, attribute it correctly, and put it inside the images folder for this week's exercise. So going back to our InDesign file, I'm just going to do File, Save As, and I'm going to save it on my computer. So I want you to do the same unless you're working on a tablet. And this is the file name that I want you to give it: your name, the semester, what it is, and where you did it. And go ahead and save that. So going back to this units idea, if I go to and get my selection tool, and I deselect, so don't select anything, and I go to the properties palette, you'll see here that you have certain controls. And again, the properties palette is context sensitive, so it depends on the tool that you have selected. It'll show different things. You need the selection tool selected to access these ones here, which are rulers and grids. If I turn my rulers on, I can right click on the ruler and change the unit that I'm using for this document. So that's a little trick that's very helpful when you're switching back and forth between units in a document. You can see you can do that here as well. I like the rulers trick because, if I have a different tool selected, I can still switch. my units. So I'm going to start with picas, and I may switch to points at some point just to make things a little bit easier. Again, if your panels is missing, just hit the tab and it'll reappear. This line, or this red line around, is that thing called bleed that we saw at the beginning. Not super important just yet. Okay. One thing you can do too with your rulers open is you can actually drag a guide out of the rulers. And you'll see that this guide here is locked. So that's another thing you can do with your selection tool, is you can lock and unlock and show guides. And we're going to be creating guides that we're going to use on every document for consistency. So we're just going to delete this. So that's one way to create a guide, is to pull it out of the ruler. Another way to create a guide is by turning a shape into a guide. So I'm going to go to my layers palette just so you can see what's happening. I'm going to take my rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle that's the same size as the page. And if I expand this layer here by clicking on the chevron, you can see here that there's a shape now in here called a rectangle. Okay, so there's this really powerful thing you can do in almost all Creative Cloud applications where you can actually enter an equation into the field here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do minus 6p. So again, the number on the left of the p is picas, and on the right is points. And in order to apply that application, I just hit the tab. It takes me to the next. Okay, I'm just going to go back, undo that. Second, cancel. So undo. And that's correct. In order to do that, so minus 6p, in order to apply it, I just hit the tab. But because I have this link selected, it's going to apply the same amount to both the width and the height. So I'm going to deselect this. Okay, deselect it before I apply it. Okay, minus 6p, so tab. So that's going to minus 6 picas from both sides of the ruler. Okay, if I go back to this again, let's do this one more time. And I'm going to talk about one thing, which is this other widget here, which is defines where the reference point is, which is where the transformation happens from. So this is going to constrain it or unconstrain it, and this defines where it happens from. So I'm going to do minus 6p, tab. It takes away from the width of both sides, so it's taking away 3 picas from each side. And then if I do minus 6 on the height, it'll do the same thing. It'll minus 3 picas from the height, from the top and the bottom of the page. So why did we do this? We now have a rectangle that is giving us a margin. So it's a nice margin around the page, and that'll allow us to be consistent in between our artboards. So how do I create this into a guide? View, guide, make guides. That's one way. That's a really long way around to do it. I can just right click here and go to make guides. That's an easier way to do it. You can see here that this is selectable. I can move it. So how is it different? Well, it locks differently. So if I'm working on a complicated artboard, I can lock the guides separate. The other thing that it does is it doesn't print. So if I was to print this, none of the guides would show up. So that's 2 advantages of using guides, is that they lock. So if I go here to properties and I lock this, go back here, it doesn't show that it's locked, but what it is I can no longer select it and move it. And you'll see how useful this is as we move through these exercises. So that's just setting up the artboard. When I go ahead and copy this, we're going to make multiple copies of this artboard. Just make sure you deselect the lock on the guides, so you're going to keep that, keep your guide on every board. So let's go ahead and make a copy of this. One copy, just for see what it's like. There's a couple ways to make copies. One way is with the Artboard selection tool. I can click and drag, and as I'm dragging, I hold down the Option key. Hold the Shift is going to constrain, and the Option key is going to copy. And you see, because the guide was unlocked, it copied it. Another way to make a copy of an artboard is to just go here to the hamburger icon on the Artboards palette and go duplicate artboard. So whatever you have selected, it's going to copy. There's two ways to copy artboards. So let's go ahead and save our file. So save. Yes. And we're going to use these two artboards right away to do our first exercise. So we're going to name this one Destructive Pathfinder. And then we're going to call this one Non-Destructive. Non-Destructive Pathfinder. So now we have two artboards. One's called Destructive, and one is called Non-Destructive. I'm going to go ahead and grab this type tool here. If you can't see this type tool, it could be, again, hidden underneath because it's got that little triangle showing. And I'm just going to click and drag. So this makes a text box. We're going to get more into depth with text boxes and text objects and how they work. But for now, I just want you to label your artboard. So you're going to label this one. I'm just going to make this faster. I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to go here and paste. So this is called Destructive Pathfinder. And that's good enough for now because the rest of the information is here. So just call it Destructive Pathfinder. That's enough. I'm going to copy this, go here, paste, take my selection tool and drag it up here. If you can't see these magenta guides that show up, it's because you don't have your smart guides showing. So again, selection tool selected, nothing selected. If you have something selected, you won't be able to see that. So deselect by clicking anywhere and just turn on your smart guides. And this one I'm going to call Non-Destructive. Non-Destructive Pathfinder. So this is an important concept when it comes to combining shapes. And there's a tool that you can use to do that, which is called the Pathfinder. Well, it's a panel, and these are all functions. So let's go ahead and make a quick series of shapes that we can apply these to so we know how they work. You kind of get a sense for what these things do just by looking at them. And if you hover over them, you have like Unite. And I'm going to show you a way to do this destructively and non-destructively. So let's go ahead and create some shapes. We're going to create two shapes. One is going to be a square. So the way we looked at creating shapes before was to click and drag. And you can see that as I drag, I'm holding the Shift key down to constrain it to a square. It's giving me some numbers here that are telling me the size of the shape. But what I want you to do is do it a little bit differently. If you hold the Option key down before you click, it gives you a dialog box that lets you enter a number. So let's create let's click on that link icon, and you're going to see this reappears in a lot of different places. We saw it here on the Properties palette. It shows up in most dialog boxes. This link constrains the width and the height. And I'm going to enter 0 picas P50. So it's going to be a 50 point. And if I hit Tab, it'll apply that to both the width and the height. It automatically transformed it, so it took all those points and converted to picas for me. I'm going to click OK, and there's my shape. Let's see what that looks like if we switch to points. I'm going to go here to my ellipse tool. I'm going to do the same thing. So holding my Option key down, I'm going to click. If I enter 50, you can see that because I changed my units to points, the dialog box is the same. And because we're just going with points, it doesn't make that conversion. It doesn't convert the points into picas. So I can click OK. Now we have a square and a circle. Just going to drag the circle so the center of it is right on the corner of the square. You don't have to be really precise with these ones, with this exercise. Some of the ones we do later, yeah, it'd be good to be precise. But this is just to give you a sense for what we're doing, so they're the same. I'm going to give these a color just to make this easier to work with. So I'm going to just color and you can use any color you want. So I'm selecting the square, give it a color. I'm going to select the circle, go to my properties palette, click on the swatch, and choose another color for it. The colors that you choose, again, are not important for this exercise. Now I'm going to select both the shapes. So click, hold my Shift key down, click on the second shape, go down to my shape mode here, and I can apply any of these. But before I do that, I'm going to select both of them, and I'm just going to click and drag across. In order to make this a little bit easier, why don't we make a label for it first? So I'm going to take this type tool here. I'm just going to click, and I'm going to call the first one Unite. Take my selection tool, take both of these, and I'm just going to drag. I'm going to need to have 6 of these on the bottom row. You can see we're going to do all 6 of these. So I'm dragging it enough so that I have room for 6 across. I'm going to go again, transform again. So Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D. If you don't have enough room and you need to move things around, that's fine. Doesn't matter too much. I'm going to take this row. So again, I'm clicking above here. And if you're clicking and you're selecting this guide, you can go here and lock your guides if it's interfering with what you're doing. I'm going to click and drag down, and that's going to give me my second row. And I'm just going to delete these 2 because you can see here that there's 4 along the top and 2 along the bottom. So I'm just going to hover over here so I can see what it does. And this is called minus front. Minus front. This one is called intersect. Intersect. This one is called exclude. This one's called divide. Divide. Let's call it trim. Merge, crop, outline, minus back. So let's see if I can remember these. Merge, I forgot already. Crop, outline, minus back. Okay, I'm going to save this. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to go to this artboard here. So here's another idea that I'm going to give you guys, which is where something gets placed when you paste it, right? So what Illustrator is always going to do, if I'm going to paste something, it's going to try and paste it into the center of the working area that I have. That's not always super useful because sometimes I want to paste it in exactly the same place. So you can see here, if I go to Edit, Paste, there's a bunch of different ways you can paste. So you can paste in front, you can paste in the back, you can paste in place. This is going to try and paste it into the center of the working area, whatever is viewable. This is always going to paste in exactly the same location, depending on which artboard you have chosen. So you can see if you click on an artboard, the very edge of the artboard turns slightly black. That's how you know which artboard you're on. Now if I go paste in front, you can see that it pastes in exactly the same place. Okay, so let's apply these and see how they work. I'm going to go ahead and select this one. I'm going to select the shape mode, which is Unite. And you can see here that it appears to have united both the shapes together and gave them both the same color. Let's do this one here, minus front. Pretty much operating as you would expect. This one is going to go, this is intersect. So whatever part of the shape that's overlapping, whatever's intersecting, is going to convert that into a shape. Sometimes Illustrator hides things so you can't see it. So one way to always be able to see what's going on is to switch your view to outline mode. And now you can see exactly what Illustrator is doing. You can see we have two shapes and it's converted it to one, right? So let's just switch back to preview so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to select these two and I'm going to choose exclude. So here's where it becomes very interesting because up till now it's been converting it into one shape. This one is not really one shape. If I go here to layers and I have this one selected, I can find this in my list here. If it's expanded, it's down towards the bottom. And here you can see that it's actually two shapes that are inside a special type of thing called a group. So group is really interesting because it allows you to do some very unique things with it. Obviously, they're going to stay together, so they're grouped like a couple of friends. If I click anywhere on here with my selection tool, it's going to select the whole thing, and I can move it around. However, if I use my direct selection tool and I click on it, I can choose one or the other piece and move it around. Another thing you can do with a group is you can change the color of one of the pieces. And this is going to become important as we move later on through other types of exercises. The difference between a group and a shape that's really joined together as one piece is a really important thing to keep in mind. So let's try these other ones here. Let's go through them quickly. So divide. So what did divide do? It's a little bit hard to tell what it did, but let's take a look here at our layers so we can see what happened. You can see that divide divided it into three shapes. So similar to exclude, it created three shapes. And again, if I take my direct selection tool, it's together in a group, I can take one of these pieces and move it around independently. Take this one called trim. And again, it's done something interesting where what it did is it did similar to this one here minus front, except it kept the front shape. So you can see now there's two shapes. Again, they're grouped together. So with the selection tool, if you click on anything in the selection here, it will keep them together. One thing that may happen with the selection tool, sometimes you may end up in a situation like this, where the whole screen goes gray and You can't click on anything, but you can click on these. This is called isolation mode. Don't panic. If you go to the top of the screen, you'll see that there's this new bar along the top. You can exit it just by clicking on the arrow, and that will bring you back to regular mode. It's like a temporary, it allows you to work inside of a group. Okay, let's see what merge does. Merge. So what did merge do? Let's here look at our layer palette and see what happened with this merge. Did something similar again. It feels similar to what we had before. This one and this one feel similar. So again, this is a very simple combination. Let's try this one here, which is crop. Well, what did crop do? Well, crop did something really interesting where it actually did this intersect function, but it also kept the shape here, but it kept it as an outline. It's almost like it thought that this top shape is what we wanted, and then it combined all of these together. Again, these are ones that I rarely use, but it's useful to try them out. And if you're trying to do something specific with shapes, you can actually start to think about which each one does. This outline one is going to look weird when you do this, because these actually don't have a stroke. So it's got 0 weight to it, but what outline does is it breaks it up and it creates strokes out of it. So these are separate shapes now, separate lines, and you may find I actually do use outline from time to time. It is actually a useful function, but if it looks weird until you actually give it the stroke a width. As soon as you give the stroke a width, then it stops rendering it in that odd way. And again, these are part of a group, but you can select them individually with the direct selection tool, and you can change the color of individual lines in here. Okay, and minus back is going to do exactly what we thought it would do, which is the opposite of minus front. So here's minus front, minus back takes the back shape and removes it out of the front shape. So this is destructive. We have gone and we've broken up our vectors, and these are very simple vectors, so they're fairly easy to redraw, but we did lose information. Now let's look at what happens if we do this non-destructively. And if you hover over here, you can see that you have it tells you what to do. If you option click, you create this compound shape that has the same function in it, but it's non-destructive. So here we've combined it, and you can see that it's working like a compound path. It's combined both those shapes into one, but you can see here by the preview, this blue line here, that those vectors are still there. Even though it's combined it into one shape, those other shapes are still there. So if we go and select part of this, it'll change all of the color. That is the difference between a group and a compound shape. A compound shape is a special type of shape that is where you've combined shapes together into one compound shape, as the name says. And it has different properties and different uses that we will get into as we go through the other exercises in this tutorial. So all the information is, so it's non-destructive. We haven't destroyed any vectors, and you can always tell what's still there by switching to preview mode. So it looks the same, but it's now a compound shape. So if we go down here, you can see that Illustrator has named it differently, has named it a compound shape. So another one, let's try this one again. So hold down the Option key, and let's switch back to preview mode. And you can see here that it did minus front, but it kept that circle in front. And this is where it starts to become really useful. because if I switch to my direct selection tool, I can actually select this circle and I can change it like this. So I can change where the hole is. I can actually make it so the hole is right in the center. So if I, again, using my hotkey, this is one thing you cannot do without using keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to switch to my selection tool, and I'm going to change the size of this. And you can see here that we created this square with a hole inside by working non-destructively. Okay, let's go through these, holding down the Option key, and the same thing, it keeps the information but gives us the same result. Let's try this one here. Same thing, but here is a little bit different, right? Because we can't separate it and keep that same, cutout circle. Let's try the divide. So divide does not allow you to do that. Obviously, because you can't make it non-destructive because that wouldn't split it up into pieces. So I'm going to delete this here because it's the same as the other board. And let's try the trim. Let's see what trim does, if we can do that. And no, we cannot. We cannot do the non-destructive with any of these other ones because they're actually designed to create little independent pieces of the original shapes. So all of these stay the same, and they are the same as the destructive ones. Okay, so that's Pathfinder. So go ahead and save it. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a copy of this board. But again, I'm going to go and I'm going to take my selection tool, and I'm going to make sure the guides are unlocked. And then I'm going to take my Artboard tool, and I'm going to drag this down. Switch to my selection tool, lock the guides, and delete this. And for this one, we're going to look at this concept of alignment. Because there's a couple of things here that are pretty interesting. On the surface, the alignment tool looks like it's pretty simple, but it does allow for some very useful ways of working. I'm actually going to change this here. I'm going to drag this up onto my Artboards and this one onto Transform, and I'm going to put this one right here in between. So if we look here at the Properties palette, you're going to see that we have a lot of different panels that show up in here, even by default. So I'm just going to draw some circles, one circle, and then I'm going to drag it and I'm going to place it randomly on the artboard like this. I'm going to select all of these, and here you can see we end up with this palette called Align. But if I click on ellipses, you can see that the Align palette is actually quite a bit bigger and more robust. So in order to work with this quickly, I'm just going to open the Align palette. It opened over here on my other monitor. And I'm going to take this tab and I'm going to drag it onto the Transform panel. And I'm going to save my artboard, call it New Workspace GD157. And now we have GD157 is our new workspace. So make sure you do the same thing. Okay, so when it comes to aligning objects, you have a similar concept here, which is where you're transforming it from, but it's a lot richer. So on this default panel that appears on the Properties palette, these ideas here are inside a drop-down here, like this. So align to selection, align to key object, and align to artboard. That's all we're going to look at today. We're not going to look at the rest of this. But by default, it's set to align to artboard. So if I click on the horizontal align to center, you can see that it aligns the objects, but also aligns them to the artboard as you would expect. If I switch over here to align to selection, it's not going to do that. It's going to align it wherever it is. The third one's a little bit harder to figure out because what it's doing is it's going to align to whichever object is on top. So if I select this and I go to align to selection, it's going to align them all to here. And the same goes for, so here we're going align to selection. If we go to artboard, it's going to align them all to the top object. So that is what Illustrator considers to be the key object, is the top one. These ones here are super useful because it allows you to distribute your objects evenly. Here, these two appear to work the same, but the artboard one is really useful because, oh yeah, align to artboard. So it aligns them to the artboard. So it'll spread your objects evenly over all the space. So this one's super useful. I'm not looking for anything particular here. I'm going to try and go over this in class. I'm just including it here in case I don't have time to go over these ideas in class. So kind of like not really an exercise, they're more just concepts. So we're just going to do one more concept. And again, I moved it without unlocking my margin guide. So make sure you do that. So B, unlock the guide. Take this one and drag it across. And here we have with our guide. I'm going to lock the guide, delete the objects, and go here to alignment. And I'm going to call this mask. So there is a couple different types of masks in Illustrator. We're just going to go over one today, which is called a vector mask. So any vector can be a mask in Illustrator. And vector uses the object that's on top as a mask. So similar to the Pathfinder function, except this is totally non-destructive. You can put any number of objects underneath here, and Illustrator is going to take the top object and make it the mask. So again, if I want this one on top, I'm going to right-click. My right-click is not working. There, right-click, and arrange, bring to front. And again, I can see what's happening here simply by opening the layers palette. Bring to front. So select all of these, and I'm going to, so that's a context-specific palette, and it doesn't always show me what I want. So if I can't find the mask in there, I'm going to go here, Object, mask. Oh, clipping mask. There it is. It's right there. Clipping mask, make. So that's Command 7. That's one I use a lot. So create mask is Command 7. One thing you can do here is if you switch to the direct selection tool, you can see here that Illustrator has combined all those shapes into one object called a clipping mask, and the mask object is still there. It just defaults to transparent. You can actually give that a color. So you can go here and give it any color, and it just makes it simpler to create a shape with colors inside of it. So for one of our exercises, we're going to do that. We're going to create a mask and then give that the mask shape a color. The other thing I want to show you is that you can actually mask images in Illustrator the same way. So again, this can be any shape, so you can create a mask out of any of these shapes You can edit it like you would any other shape. So your mask, I can take part of it and move it. I can take my pen tool and I can add a point and change the shape of it. So a mask can be any shape. So I'm going to place the image here that we have. So I'm going to go File, Place, and I'm in the Compound Shapes folder. So inside here is my image. I'm going to select this one and I'm going to place it. So when I go to place an image in Illustrator, okay, I'm going to go back here again for a second just to make sure that you guys see this. I'm going to go Place, I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to look here at the bottom of what the options are. So I have different options for placing an image, and the one that's really important to keep in mind is link. If I don't have that selected, Illustrator is going to embed the image inside of this Illustrator file. And the challenge with that is that it'll make the Illustrator file really big. It also makes it so that it's harder to edit the image because Illustrator is not good at editing vector files. Photoshop is. So if I want to edit this in Photoshop and it's embedded inside Illustrator, there's a lot of extra steps that I have to go through to extract it from the Illustrator file and to open it in Photoshop, save it, and then re-import it. But if it's linked, all I have to do is edit it in Illustrator, save it, edit it in Photoshop, save it, and then it automatically will update inside of Illustrator. Pretty much automatically, but the updating is actually fairly easy. So when you're placing something, I encourage you to always, unless you're intentionally need to embed it, choose to link it. I'm going to place it, I get a little preview. Wherever I click, that's where it's going to place this image. You can see right away that this image is very large for this Illustrator file. So one way to easily change the size so it'll fit inside the page is to look here at my transform palette, choose the reference point where I want to scale it from, and then choose to constrain the proportions. Constraining proportions with photography is extremely important. It's almost always, when you don't do it, it's almost always a mistake. Rarely do you ever want to change the proportions of a photograph. It just tends to look weird and terrible. It doesn't respect what the photographer was doing. So constrain proportions, and let's go down to 60 pixels, 60 points. It's too small, but again, this is easy to change now that it fits on the artboard. And I'm just gonna hold my shift key down when I change the size. And now I'm going to create a shape on top. Change to my selection tool, select both of these, and make clipping math is now available in the context menu there. And you can see that that creates a clipping mask around this photo. Here, see here that it did the same thing as the previous one in the layers palette, so I can select either of them. I can select this one, I can select this one, and move it. The easiest way to edit them independently is actually to use the direct selection tool. So less fussy, so I can actually move it around. If I want to resize it, it's really useful to use this hotkey because I can just switch easily. Again, hold my shift key down and I can recrop it. Okay, so this is one way we can create a mask. I want to show you one more interesting idea around masks, and that is this idea again of a compound shape. Because so far, when we looked at a compound shape, one of these turned out to be a compound shape. And some of these turned out to be compound shapes. But again, the difference between a compound shape and a group is that a group is really just you're holding the position of the things together. You're making it easier to select them all at once. That's all you're doing. Whereas a compound shape is a very interesting type of object in that it has the properties of one united shape. So I'm just going to take my direct selection tool and I'm going to select this photo and I'm going to go copy. I'm going to deselect and I'm going to go paste. And this creates another copy of this photo. I'm just going to drag this down below to make some room. And now I want to create a compound path, compound shape. So I'm going to go like this, create one shape. I'm going to give it a color. Let's give it this default color for masks, which is magenta. And then I'm going to make another one here. So I'm going to take my rectangle tool again, and I'm going to create another one right here. And then I'm going to create another little one like this right here. Okay, so I'm going to select all three of these, and let's see what kind of, okay, select all three of these and right click on it. Okay, it gave me the compound path here. So if it doesn't give it to you there, go down here, go to Object, Compound Path, and Make. And again, this is a function that I use quite a bit, so the Command 8 is very useful to know for me. Especially at the beginning, you have to pick and choose which shortcuts you memorize, because there's quite a few, and don't try and memorize them all at once, unless you're really good at memorizing. Okay, so here we have a compound shape. So let's take a look here in a layers palette. We have a compound shape and we have this linked image here. So compound shape, linked image, let's select both of them, right click and make a clipping mask. And here you can say that it treats it as one shape. So it's one kind of mask, everything shows between. Let's just take a quick look at what this would look like if it was a group. So let's do this, release clipping mask. Let's take our mask, which is on top, give it a color again. Let's release compound path, and this time let's make a group. So object, group. Now let's select this image, right click, make clipping mask. And you can see here that Illustrator cannot use it as a mask. So that's one of the advantages of a compound path, is that together all the pieces make one kind of cohesive shape that has very particular properties. That is very useful. So again, using the direct selection tool, I can actually take this and I can actually move it over top. So it creates this mask that has a hole in the middle, right? So it's like a little donut, right? And if I drag this over top, you can see that it actually has a hole inside. Okay, so that is these kind of high-level concepts that I wanted to show you. Pretty sure I would have had time to show you this in class. If I did, make sure you skip ahead. And if you want a little review, you can always come back and watch them. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And here's where we start looking at some pretty complicated, it's pretty amazing that you can do this with relative ease. I'm not telling you that this is easy to do. It is a fairly complex thing, and I want you to watch really carefully. Maybe if you do find the concepts hard, maybe just watch it first. You can even watch it fast, stop it, rewind, and then do it with me. And that way it'll be easier to understand. You'll be less likely to miss things. Oh yeah, so again, make sure that you name your artboards. So this one here is called alignment. And this one here is called masks. So quick introduction to these two kind of ideas, or four ideas. One is a Pathfinder, destructive Pathfinder. The second one is the non-destructive Pathfinder, and then alignment, and masks. So four ideas, and now we're going to look at more complex little exercises. Okay. So what we're going to do is do the same thing. I'm going to take my selection tool and deselect, and I'm going to unlock my guide, and then I'm going to take this artboard tool and I'm going to take this one and drag it down. And here we're going to create a little galaxy. So just you can call it galaxy if you want. Galaxy. And I'm going to keep one of these. No, I'm going to delete them all. I'm going to start from scratch. Oh yeah, don't delete your guides. So selection tool, lock your guides, and delete the objects. So what we have here is a artboard with nothing on it, and I already showed you guys how to do that. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I want you to really think about this point in the center as being the center of the page. And it's useful, again, having this margin is useful because it gives us a center of the page, which is going to make this exercise a little bit easier to get it kind of accurate. So I'm just going to create a circle here, and in order to make it easier for you to follow, I'm going to click and I'm going to give it a size. So it doesn't matter too much, but I'm going to give it a size of 40. So that gives me one circle, and I'm going to zoom in a bit. So again, I'm using the pinch and pinch on my trackpad. I like working with the trackpad. I got used to working with the trackpad when I worked on the SkyTrain. I worked downtown for years, lived in the burbs with my kids, and I traveled on the SkyTrain. It's like, sometimes over 2 hours a day, and I used that time to work. And I regret it because I should have just been reading. Okay, so we're going to call this Artboard Galaxy. Keeping your files organized, very useful. So this is our first circle, and we're going to do this thing where we do copy, paste in front. And that it looks like we have one object, but we actually have two, right? So I already showed you this. It actually puts one thing right on top of the other. I'm going to take this one and I'm going to increase the size of it. How much you increase it is not so important, but if you want to follow exactly what I do, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. We can go, I'm just going to change it here. Go and make sure that this link is selected. I'm scaling it from the center, and let's make this one, let's make it 70. So this one is going to be a guide. So we're going to actually convert it into a guide. So right click, make guides. And we're going to take this one. We're going to drag it up here, drag it straight up and line it with the top of that. And then I'm going to resize it. And again, the amount is not so important. So I'm going to resize it like this. Oh yeah, hold the shift key down to constrain the proportion. The important thing is that you leave a little gap around here. So this is going to be a planet, and this is going to be a moon. So just leave some space there. Of course, as we know, the space between objects in space is much greater than the objects, but we kind of understand it this way. So the distance between the moon and the Earth is far greater than the mass, right? The size, the distance between the stars is infinitely larger than the size of the stars themselves. But this is a little bit of just to make things easier for us. Okay, I'm going to go here to layers, and you can see here that this one is locked, right? Because it's a guide. I'm just going to unlock the guide for a minute, and I'm going to select these ones. Oh, did not let me select it. Okay, it's not letting me select the guide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the other way of selecting, where I go click, hold it. Okay, it selected it because it's on top. Okay. This is going to get more complicated, but if you have it's a good point, because if you have a hard time selecting things, if you open your layers palette, it'll make it easier, because again, you can hold the shift key down, select, and that gives me all three of them. It actually had selected all three. It just doesn't show it to me in the bounding box, right? So I'm going to go ahead and group them. So I've grouped all three, and now I have a group that has these guides in it. I'm going to leave the guides unlocked. And what that's going to do is it is going to allow me to do a special thing in a minute. I'm going to select all this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tool here. We haven't used the transform tools yet. You're going to use the rotation tool. And what I want to do is I want to rotate this around the center. So there's a couple ways I can do it. I can click here in the center, and that sets the reference point like we talked about, and I can just move it like this around the circle. I can even hold down the Option key to make a copy. So that's one way of doing it. This time I actually want to do it mathematically. So I'm going to show you how to do it mathematically first, and then there may be times when you want to use that just manually. So in order to get the dialog box up, I'm going to hold the Option key down, and that adds the ellipses right beside the cursor. It changes it, so that way you know there's more coming, right? If I click, that opens the dialog box. What I want to do is I want to create 12 around the center. So here again is where the mathematic abilities of Creative Cloud inside a dialog box are very useful. So 360 is the number of degrees in a complete circle. And I'm going to divide that by 12. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me, well, it's going to do the equation for me when I hit tab. Again, if I hit preview, it'll give me a preview of how far that's going to move. But I know that that is going to give me exactly 12 of these planets around the circle. So if I hit OK, it'll move it. If I hit copy, it'll create a copy. And then I can do the same thing we were doing with moving, which is Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, all the way around. It's Command D. So that gave me 12 planets around this center. In order to make this a little more realistic, why don't we actually take a minute and make these ones white. And now let's go to our layers. So far we've been working with one layer. Let's create a new layer. Drag it underneath the other one, and let's call it background. Background. I'm going to take my rectangle tool, draw a rectangle, again the same size, and as I draw, you can see here that the smart guides tell me where I am. I'm intersecting there. I know it's exactly the right size. You can see here that Illustrator tells me which layer I'm on. There's this little square highlights to show me that there's something selected on that layer. I'm going to color this black. So now we know we're in outer space. I'm going to go back to my layers palette, and I'm going to lock this layer. So this hides and shows a layer, and that locks it. Now I'm going to go back to this layer 1, and I'm going to call it draw here. And I'm going to save it. So I'm going to go save. So the other thing you're going to want to do now is you're going to want to change the color of your label. Otherwise it's not super visible. So let's go ahead and give that white. Now we have these planets, each of them with a moon on it. I'm going to go ahead and select them. And now I want to do this other type of transform, which is called transform each. And that allows us to add a little bit of randomness to our transformation, which is super fun. So we've been using transform again, which is Command D. It just repeats it every time exactly the same. So we talked about this a little bit in 101 in the other class where I teach, where we talk about rhythm. So rhythm in design is really important. Things are happening in a regular intervals. That's rhythm. But in design, we try and add some narrative to that, where instead of it always being exactly the same, maybe the size is changing, right? So, okay, so Transform Each does this really special thing where it'll take one object or one group, so you know how we grouped each of those planets and moons together, and it'll transform them as a group. So it allows us to do a few things, so we can transform them so they're transformed all the same, right? Unfortunately, it doesn't have a link between these two, so you have to do them independently. So at 100%, you can see here that they're all the same. We can also move them, and we can rotate them. So we can actually rotate these. And if you're not seeing this happen live, you have to choose preview, right? So this rotates them all exactly the same. If we rotate it 360 degrees, it's going to look the same because it's rotating it all the way around. But here's where this particular function is really useful, in that it adds some randomness to it. So if I click here on random, it'll move them all at different degrees randomly. I've never seen it, if it was truly random, then once in a while some of them would be the same. But, and I can keep clicking and it'll just keep choosing a different one every time. And it doesn't seem to ever do them so they're all exactly the same. You know how if it was truly random, at some point this one would be the same as this one. So there's only so many degrees of difference, right? But Illustrator seems to be added some intelligence in here, and they're never the same. At least I've never seen it happen. These are very close. If you don't like it, just click on random and let it do it again. So if you don't like the randomness that came, just do it again. I also want to look at here, it's randomizing the scale. So 10, 10, and that will make some of them big, some of them small. So it starts to feel more like a galaxy, where, at least one view of the galaxy that we understand, where the size of the planets and their rotation if they have moons is different. So this time we're going to click OK, not copy, and this one's finished. So I'm going to click Save. And now I'm going to do something else where I take this, I'm going to make another one here. So again, I'm going to unlock my guides, selection tool, unlock the selection tool. It's not letting me unlock the guides because now I have guides and the guides are not visible. That's why. Okay. You can't unlock them if they're not visible. So unlock guides. Now I'm going to take my Artboard tool again, and I'm going to drag this down here so I can see the guides. And I had locked them after all that. I locked them. So unlock them. Artboard tool. For this one, what I want to do is I'm going to create some random stars. I'm actually going to use this artboard instead. So I'm going to take this one, make sure the background layer is unlocked, and I'm going to drag this here across. Okay, I'm going to lock this background layer. I'm going to lock my guides, and I'm going to delete this. And this one's a little quickie, but we're going to do 3 different versions of it. So we're going to do stars, and we're going to use that function that we've used before, which is called transform again. This is all transform again. So I'm going to take my ellipse tool, And I'm going to draw one circle like this. And then I'm going to, and this doesn't, try to keep it a little bit tight, but it doesn't matter too much, the space in between or the size of them. So I just moved it by holding down my Option key and Shift to constrain it. So Command D to create all of these. And then I'm going to drag this up here. And again, if you select the background, just make sure you go here and you lock it. And then I'm going to do the same thing across. Just drag it across. Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D to fill this space. You notice I didn't drag it up into here. I just didn't want to interfere with this text field there. Okay, so now we have this grid of shapes and stars. I'm going to unlock this because we're going to make 3 copies. Switch to my Artboard tool, and this is going to be just because the pattern that you get out of this is actually very beautiful. So it's good to have. So here we're going to call this stars. Oops. Okay. Take my type tool, click in here, and call this stars size, and call this stars horizontal, and ended up with another artboard here by accident. So I'm going to delete that. And stars, vertical, and stars both. Those words will mean something in a minute. So I'm just going to scroll back to here. I'm going to, looks like I moved this, move it back. I just won't use this one again, but everything's a little bit off with it. So I'm going to lock the background. I'm going to take my selection tool, and I'm going to lock the guides. So here I'm going to select all these stars, and I'm going to go to Object, Transform, Transform Each. And here I'm only going to change the size. So here I could even go lower to 5. And you can see right away that's kind of this, it's pretty nice way to create a pattern, right? It still has rhythm to it, but it has rhythm with a little bit of a narrative, so it's saying something. I'm going to take this next one, and we're going to do the same thing. Object, transform, transform each. And this time we're going to move it horizontally. So let's move it quite a bit. Let's try moving it until we start to feel the lines showing up. So this starts to feel like some sort of warp pattern. And here is how we end up with the final stars, which are, if we resize it this way too, then it's going to feel like stars. And if you find that these are still too big to be stars, you can just go do it again. So arrange, transform each, and let's stop moving it just to keep it. And we can actually resize them all. We can even go down in size, so they're ending up a lot smaller. And so that's 3 quick patterns that you can create with transform each. So pretty powerful function. Okay, so 2 more of these. So the next one is we're going to create a planet. So let's take our galaxy artboard again. Drag it down. Oh, let's see, we get this warning that there's some things locked. So Command Z, V, unlock the artboard, and unlock the layers. Drag this down. Lock this one. Lock this here. Takes a little bit of getting used to that way of working, but once you do it, it's great. So I can delete these. And now what I want to do is I want to create rings around a planet. So again, we're going to create a compound shape. So I'm going to start with a ellipse here. So we're drawing from the center, and want a nice big ring here. So we have one there. Now we're going to copy, and we're going to go edit, paste in front, and I'm going to resize this from the center. So holding the Option key, resize it from the center. I'm going to select both of them, and I'm going to go make compound path. So now we have a ring, but I actually want to cut the ring in half because I want part of the ring to be in front and part of the ring to be behind the planet that's behind it. So I'm going to take this tool here, which is the line segment tool. Again, starting in the center, I'm going to draw across here. So, okay, no, I'm going to draw a line segment from here and just draw it straight across here. Not sure why it's snapping it up there, but let's just draw straight across like that. I don't know what Illustrator was doing there. It's the simplest tool you could use. Okay. Okay, so one thing I'm going to do here is, because this next function divides everything behind it. So I'm going to hide the background, and now we have two, only the line is selected. And I'm going to go here and go path, divide objects below. So I know what happened here, and this thing appeared. So if that thing ever appears, you want to hide it. It does some weird things. And I'm not sure what never remember what the keyboard command is to hide and show that. It's show grid, which is this one. And so it starts to do some odd things to the artwork. So now we have, go back and show this. And here you see we actually have two paths. So it split that compound shape into two. We have a front one and a back one. It's still transparent because obviously that's one shape and the other one's another one. I'm going to go here in the center and make another circle. So I'm going to take my ellipse tool, start in the center, and create this here. And in order to be able to see this, I'm going to give this a color. So escape. So I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to group them, and then I'm going to modify it just by dragging onto the handle here, but I want to do it from the center. So I'm going to go and hold the Option key down, and this is going to move it from the center. And you can see here that because these are grouped, it kept them together on the same layer, and I can't change that. If I take this, if I take the direct selection tool and grab this one and try and move it to arrange, bring to front, you can see here that because it's grouped together, it'll bring it to the front of that group. So a couple of ways I can move this, but the best way is to take this and ungroup. And then I'm just going to go right click, arrange, bring to front. But as you know, that arrange, bring to front, if you think back to our last tutorial, there's lots of ways of doing it. And there's lots of ways to separate this group too. I can go here and I can actually grab this object and drag it out using the layers palette. This is another way of doing it. So you can see here we ended up with a planet. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And this is the last one we're going to do. And this is actually a fairly complex looking illustration, but actually very quick and simple to do with the new tools that Illustrator has given us. So I'm going to leave this locked. I actually don't want anything from here except for the guide and the label. This is called a planet, and I'm just going to update my keep my artboards updated. So stars, and this one is stars. So I just changed the size. And this one, again, that just speaks to the randomness of it. So next one is stars, horizontal. And this last one is stars, or stars both. And then we did our planet. And now I want to do one more. So I'm going to leave this locked. And I'm going to take my artboard tool. And I'm going to make another copy of this. And this time it is okay to leave that locked. I do not care. I don't want the background for this last one. That messed it up pretty badly. Let's do that again. Okay, I do not care. Okay, I'm going to select this and delete it. I'm going to take this here. And I'm going to change the fill to black, and I'm going to call this Motif. And the reason why I included in this kind of like space theme Motif is it reminds me of some of the kind of space motifs that I've seen in Motif, in some like traditional like pattern motifs. Okay, so if you get a text object that has that little red plus on it, that means that there's some hidden there's hidden characters. There's characters that are hidden behind the size of the shape. So the shape is too small. But we're going to go over text. We'll go over the working with text more in a future exercise. We lost our grid, our guide, so I forgot to unlock it. So I'm just going to go ahead and unlock guides. I'm going to grab this one here, copy, and then again I have to click on this artboard, and then I'm going to go paste in front. I'm going to lock it, lock the guide, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a rectangle that is, take my rectangle tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle that is 90 pixels wide, and let's try 90 times 3. Oh, that didn't work. Okay. So the width is going to be 90, and the height is going to be 90 times 3. I'm going to make it taller. I'm going to add another 90. So I'm going to deselect the link, and I'm going to add another 90 to that. Okay, that should work perfectly. I'm going to give this no fill, and I'm going to give it a stroke black, and I'm going to make the stroke nice and thick. So I'm going to make it 1/3 the width of the object. That's 30. Okay, so here, what the idea is with this is I want to divide the shape in 3. So I want a white space in the center that is the same width as the strokes. So you would think that the width of 90 divided by 3 would be 30 points each. But here you can see Illustrator did something else here, and it's measuring the width of this object, including the strokes. So not just this actual shape, but actually the strokes that it drew around it. So we can change where Illustrator draws the strokes. If you click on the word stroke, it'll give you another modal, and this allows you to decide where those strokes are drawn. Is it drawn on the outside? Is it drawn on the inside? And if I deselect here, you'll see now Illustrator understands that this shape is actually only 90 pixels. And there is a 30-point space in the center, and then there's 2 bars on each side that are 30 pixels. I'm going to take my rotation tool, and I'm going to make a copy. So I'm going to click in the very center here, tab 90 degrees, and copy. And now we have two rectangles on top of each other. They're each the same size and have the same stroke. I'm going to go and draw a circle here now. Again, starting in the center. Hold the Option key down to get the dialog box. I'm going to make this 190. And because I had the link, it constrained the width and the height. Click OK. And I'm actually going to enlarge this so that I can see I want to be able to see these triangles here in between. Okay. Now what I want to do is I'm going to take my selection tool and select these 2 rectangles. Switch to the direct selection tool, grab the corner widgets, and make them rounded corners. I'm going to make sure that this here is 30 pixels, 30 points. So they're all 30 points. I'm going to select them all, go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke. So what that did is it created 3 compound shapes. So each of these has a hole in it. So it's made up of 2 circles that are united together into one shape, so there's a hole in the center. Selection tool, select this one. I'm going to give them each a different color so it's easier to see what we're doing. And we're going to have to do this a couple of times, so don't worry too much about the color the first time. You can make your final selection at the end. Let's give this one a more different color, easier to see. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna weave it together, and it looks a little bit complicated at first, the choices that you're making, but if you think that you're always weaving, so the line goes over one and down and under the other, so it's always over, under, over, under, over, under, then it actually simplifies it quite a bit. So for this one, we are going to use the Shape Builder tool. And the way this works is you just click and drag, and you can see here when I move my cursor over it, it's selecting the part that's going to be part of the shape. So if I start here on a part that's not overlapping, and I drag this across, this is going to go over. And now I want to go under, and then I'm going to go over, and then the next one goes under, and then this goes over, and then that one's under, and then this one goes over. And now we have our first interaction between 2 shapes, between the 3 shapes. This is over, or this is under, so now we go over. This is under, this goes over, this goes under, this goes over. Over, yeah, this is under, so this goes over. And the last part we're going to do is we're going to finish off these ones here. So this is over, this is over, under, over, under, over. And let's give them some colors. So so this is an interesting type of object because Illustrator understands this in a particular way when we're working with these objects. Right now it understands them as one path, but as soon as I select them and I choose one of these, then it starts to understand them as one shape. So if I take the paint tool, and here you can see the paint tool allows me to choose different colors. If I switch over to this dark green, I can start filling these in, and this helps to separate which shapes are which. And let's choose the darkest one. Again, if you don't have these colors selected, if you're just giving you black and white, you can select different colors just by choosing here. So if I choose a color here, then this appears on that list of swatches with the paint tool. So it'll switch it to a different color scheme. So this one is black, so I'm just going to fill all these center ones with black. And that is a motif that used to be very complex to make, but with these two new tools, the Shape Builder tool and the Live Paint Bucket tool, you can make these really quickly. So here we have these exercises here and these concept boards. The last thing you're going to do is save it. And again, file, save as a copy. Make sure that when you're saving your final PDF, you don't save as a PDF, because that can cause you to lose whatever artwork you didn't save previously. Delete the word copy. And you're saving it as a PDF, so it won't save over it. You're saving all the artboards. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to compress that photo that's in there. So average downsampling using JPEG, average downsampling using JPEG, and average downsampling to zip is okay for bitmaps. So this is color bitmaps, grayscale bitmaps, and monochrome bitmaps. So go ahead and save this. And now switch over to the assignment page. So this assignment page is called Combining Shapes. Exercise 3, Combining Shapes. And these are the functions that you used. Go ahead and browse local files. A little trick in Illustrator is that if you have the file open, not Illustrator, the Mac, can go to your Finder and you can drag an object like that and it'll find it in the Finder, so you don't have to go looking for it in your dialog box. So it found it and selected it. Go ahead and upload. And at this point, if you want to tell me something that you learned, so put in the comments something that you learned, something that you found frustrating, something that you didn't understand, just a little short 1 or 2 sentences telling me what you learned in this exercise. And that would be great. So we'll see you in the next one.